Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film The Bride, directed by Maggie Ghyllenhall. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I think Maggie Ghyllenhall is a really talented filmmaker. The Bride is bold, it's creative, and it's great fun. It's a really compelling alternative to the many Frankenstein films that we've seen, including last year's Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Wikipedia says that there's more than 400 Frankenstein feature films. I've only seen a handful of them, but in terms of the Frankenstein's bride side of the story, it's very much the male gaze that we've had in all of the films that I've seen. But the clue is in the name of this film, The Bride. The original book was by a radical woman, and this is an interesting development for a version written, directed by a woman with great female actors in really meaty roles. Perhaps the film is really more in keeping with the radical nature of the book than any of the films that have gone before it. I've actually done a separate video on a number of Frankenstein films that I recently watched, and I think that The Bride stands up very well amongst some of those classic films. I saw Ghyllenhall in an interview and she was talking about how the second Frankenstein film in 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein, in this film we only see the bride for a few minutes at the end. I'd never seen The Bride of Frankenstein, so in this batch of Frankenstein films that I watched The Bride of Frankenstein. And it's true that in The Bride we only see the bride for a few minutes. But what you can say about it is that it's a really strong image of the bride in 1935. She had crazy hair, she had the jerky movements. It was a fascinating idea, I think, for Ghyllenhall to take that character and give it the substance that it deserves. So the film opens with Mary Shelley speaking directly to the audience. And when she ends her little opening speech with, "Here comes the mother effing bride," this was really a declaration that this film is going to take us somewhere new. There's an interesting comparison, I think, with the recent Wuthering Heights film directed by Emerald Fennell. I've done a separate review on that. In her reinterpretation of the classic book, she's come in for a lot of criticism, and I found that her version of Wuthering Heights just didn't feel like an interesting take. It felt like a fan fiction version of the story. The Bride is a great example of how there's nothing wrong with a reinterpretation, with a creative kind of reinterpretation, but it has to be done well, particularly with iconic literature or characters as both these are. I loved The Bride's reinterpretation of this classic story. Some of the critics have accused The Bride of tonal incoherence. They don't like the way that it jumps jarringly between, on the one hand, an earnest goth horror, on the other hand, a grim gangster noir movie, and then sometimes a kind of campy musical with a punk rock and anarchist undercurrent. I really disagree with this. There is this mix of tones, but for me, it really works, and it's essential to the kind of punk rock energy of the film. The musical elements of the film are interesting. There are full dance numbers in this film, and I'm not a big fan of musicals, but I kind of enjoyed it. There is a bit of a trend in the use of the musical genre in films that aren't conventional musicals. Recently we've had Annette, we've had Emilia Perez, The End, and most recently The Testament of Anne Lee. These are all films with substance that didn't have to be musicals. Contrast this, say, with Wicked, which revels in being a musical, where the theatre is more important than the substance. I'm not really convinced by this modern use of the musical genre generally. This is just my personal taste. But the singing and dance numbers in The Bride really did work for me. I think because they are actually part of the story. Christian Bale's Frank has a love for classic cinema. We see him practicing the moves from the old films. The musical elements here really do make sense. The music is really good. It's kind of modern meets period music. It mixes contemporary music and 1920s, 30s music. It does this very well. The acting performances in this film are superb. Jessie Buckley is fantastic. This is her Oscar performance for me. She is a great actor, but for me, her character in Hamnet was overacted. This, in The Bride, it's much more raw and visceral. She let herself completely into the character in a totally compelling way. The character of the bride is unpredictable, so Jessie Buckley has to move between these various personalities that the bride has. On the one hand, she's playing Ida or Penny, the victim. This is the body that becomes the vessel for the transformation. Then she also goes into the personality of Mary Shelley. She's possessed by this spirit from the grave that is voicing a repressed fury of a 19th century woman. The character of the bride is unpredictable. She moves between different personalities, and Jessie Buckley does this really well. On the one hand, she's playing Ida or Penny. She's the victim. She is the body that becomes the vessel for this transformation. Then she's playing Mary Shelley, who possesses this woman. She's the spirit from the grave. She's voicing the repressed fury of a 19th century woman. And then finally, there's the bride, the creation, the final result, this unfiltered feminist fury. It's a really extraordinary performance, anarchic, unhinged, and just great fun. There's a great supporting cast led by women. Annette Bening as the doctor who takes up Frankenstein's work, Penelope Cruz as the detective outwitting all the male detectives. All of this really subverts the traditional gender roles of the era in a fun way. Christian Bale is also great as Frankenstein's creature. He's really human and decent, which is true to the character in the book. He's not a monster. He's definitely secondary to the bride as a character, but he's still really good in this role. I loved the opening of the film, the device of Mary Shelley speaking to us. It's actually inspired from the 1935 Bride film. But in that case, Shelley is a polite, well-spoken society woman. In Ghyllenhall's Bride, Shelley is a raging feminist with a defiant tone. She's reclaiming the Frankenstein story after the hundreds of perversions of it. This device was so successful for me. And unlike 1935, Shelley has a presence throughout the film. This works really well. It's such a classic line, "Here comes the mother effing bride." It was a moment when I almost felt like cheering. I also loved the idea of the Joker-style revolution, the internal brain attack, this psychological liberation. The character of the bride sparks a wider social movement, with women adopting the bride's look as a sign of their own awakening and rebellion. I loved the idea of disobedient geometry, that nature and human spirit have their own paths and refuse to be constrained by artificial social systems. So there really is a lot of substance to chew on in this film, but it's great fun. It has unapologetic politics, but it's never didactic. Even in its obvious Me Too references, it remains fun and badass, portraying the bride as a protagonist of feminist fury rather than just a cautionary tale about man playing God. I'm definitely going to try and catch it a second time while it's still on the big screen. I highly recommend this film. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.